Hi, I'm Kristin Poole, the artistic director of the Foster, and the area explored in this section of Tony's Sacred Places journey is one of both legend and mystery. The land has been occupied for centuries by a diverse array of cultures, from ancient Anasazi people who lived in the niches of sandstone cliffs and grew corn from the washes underneath, to 250 Latter-day Saint settlers who in 1879 were sent to claim territory southeast of the Colorado River and had to cut, blast, and carve their way through the rock for their wagons and their animals. So the area is enormously rich with strange land formations that beg for both geologic explanation as well as creation myths, recognized today as sacred lands that are held by the Navajo Nation. Much of the stories that are linked to this landscape are really shared orally by tribal elders and native tour guides. But for most of us in the West, our knowledge of the land, of this area and this landscape, comes from movies and novels. In 1913, the popular Western author Zane Grey came to the valley and described what he called a strange world of colossal shafts and buttes of rock, magnificently sculptured, standing isolated and aloof, dark, weird, lonely. Grey was so inspired by the landscape that he wrote a novel called Wildfire and set it in Monument Valley. And films like John Ford's Stagecoach and The Searchers made these lands stand for the iconic American West in movies and reinforced this notion that there were vast open areas of desert and land. But rarely did these films tell the whole story of the conflict between tribal nations and Western settlers who wanted to claim the land as their own. So we glean bits and pieces. Tribal history tells us of a land that was the playground for ancient gods in Navajo legend. The giant red rock mesas of Monument Valley are the carcasses of defeated monsters. They were slain by the holy people and buried in the sand. And the sandstone monoliths that are the mittens are hands rising up from the earth. The Navajo believe they belong to spiritual beings watching over their people. But these stories are not ours to tell. And while they pique our curiosity and certainly aid in our desire to go and see and be in these lands, more importantly, what the stories do is they reinforce the value of the land, not just as a place of beauty, but a place where people, all different kinds of people, are in relationship with the land. And this is how we build stories and histories about ourselves, is by telling stories about the land that we occupy. Tony's painting these sites honors both those relationships and all of those histories and all of those peoples. So now let's take some time to listen to Tony talk about his own journey and get his stories about his experience of these lands. Welcome, Tony. Glad to talk to you today.
Thank you. Nice to be here. In fact, nice to be here sitting in front of some enormous rock formation at Muley Point with Monument Valley in the distance.
It's really quite dramatic.
You would hardly believe I was in Cornwall.
So this next group of paintings and part of the Sacred Places journey that we wanted to talk about is around Monument Valley and Comb Ridge. And with the exception of the trip that you took down the San Juan River, which was kind of a little mini journey, this body of work is really all about these very specific places that were in this really dramatic sandstone valley. And it strikes me as quite beautiful, but also, I guess, dramatic and stark would be the right word.
Yeah, yes.
You know, I was thinking about the large painting that you did for this series on the Immigrant Trail at Comb Ridge, and how that beautiful painting, you get this enormous sense of expanse. You really get a sense of it being a valley and sort of being nestled in there. In your diary, you talk about the heat and the sort of pressure of the heat. Do you remember that specifically?
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, I got two things out of that, really. One was the absolute sort of brutality, really, of the heat. but also the fact that Combe Ridge was the start of the emigrant trail, and I could not conceive how you could get oxes and wagons along this thing they called a trail. I mean, you could barely walk along it, let alone, and the idea of doing that with loaded wagons, you know, in that heat, in that country, just seemed extraordinary to me. I couldn't believe that human beings could do such a thing. It just was I wouldn't like to say superhuman, but it seemed impossible. And so just camping there for, as you say, for 8 days, and walking up from the river every day onto my painting site and back again, that was enough of a challenge for me. Never mind building a blasted city on it.
You know, the tenacity and the arrogance, I suppose, and the ignorance all combined are really quite remarkable. And I mean,
and the faith, I suppose, the Mormon faith. I mean,
I mean, I think that's exactly. I think that is the flip side of that. Looking at the painting structurally, I'm also in awe of, I don't know if you remember it specifically, but in the foreground of that, the Emigrant Trail onto Combe Ridge, there is this wonderful articulation of, they look like little tiny brown stemmed plants right in the foreground. And then you're taken in through the valley into the painting in this beautiful, glorious sky. But I was wondering, as I was looking at those little tiny plants, if you could, is that the way that you paint, where there's the absence of paint, the way that white is articulated in the foreground? Is that the paper that is left raw there that you sort of then outline?
Exactly that. Yeah, exactly that.
It's so fabulous.
Thank you.
It really is. It's such a wonderful way to focus your eye at the very beginning, and then you go into this sweeping landscape.
Well, thank you. In fact, using or leaving, you know, these little dots and lines and of white on the page always seems to me to add a sort of sparkle to the painting. And so I try and leave little touches of white in places to add that kind of, just that sort of spark, as I say, that sort of sparkle to the thing. Really, it sort of lifts it.
The other large painting from this series is the one of Muley Point looking south into Goosenecks. And that one in your diary, you said, took 12 days. And then you say something in the diary of that painting about that you got up and you go hunting for duck-headed men.
Yes.
What are duck-headed men?
These duck-headed men are pictographs, which are completely unique to this one tiny area. But anyway, none of us had any idea where it was. And so we actually were driving 4-wheel drive at the base of the cliff where I was working, at the base of that cliff. And we were sort of boulder hopping and, you know, just going along, but, you know, no idea where these things were. And suddenly Pam said, "There's one." And sure enough, there was this thing. And if you look on the bottom of that painting,
the little, yes, the
pictograph
souvenir.
That's exactly what it was. That little figure of a man with a duck's head.
That's so great. That's so great. I love so many things about this painting. I love the tree in the foreground and the drama and the color of that tree and how it, again, sort of gives you this focal point to read the rest of the painting. But I also really love the shard or measurement of all of those shards of rock. What inspired you to do that?
Yeah, but well, in fact, the reason was because the entire area where I wandered up and down that escarpment looking for the right painting site, but I noticed wherever I went there were just enormous numbers of flint shards like that. You know, the waste products of making arrowheads or making stone tools, but they were just everywhere, piles of them. And so I thought, well, obviously I'm not going to take them away. And so I just did that strip of studies of them just to record the fact that this place had been inhabited perfectly happily, presumably by you know, I don't know, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. I had no idea, but you know, people lived there. And, now it's obviously taken over by the nation in some way, but it didn't used to be. It used to belong to that tribe, whoever they were.
Right.
Hmm.
I love that. I didn't read them as flint shards
Yes, that's what they were. Because of course there's no flint up there. I mean, it's all
Right.
sandstone. So
Right.
yeah.
Wonderful. So I want to talk about the San Juan journey a little bit. The San Juan River has so many names. It's called Male Water, Long Body, Old Age River. The Navajo describe it as a white-haired man and a flash of lightning that will protect the Navajo from invaders, and that inside the river lies a guardian protecting those who pray to him.
Yeah, it's very poetic, that, isn't it?
So you did 8 paintings along the river, and it's interesting. You really get a sense of the change. It starts out in meadows and flatlands, and then you end up in this wonderful, dramatic high canyon landscapes. And I think it's maybe the last painting, there's this wonderful thunderhead. And I realized in looking over these series, I don't think I'd ever seen a thunderhead before in your painting.
On a river, no, on a river painting.
Was it hard for you to capture that? It's just beautiful, the light of that thunderhead.
Well, not that difficult, except if you look, you can see there's some white spots in the sky there. Well, that's where it was raining on the painting. You see that?
Yeah, I can see that. Oh, that's great. I hadn't noticed that before. And so then I really love how this whole series, you have the souvenirs really ground us and give us some historical and social perspective. And you have this wonderful Zuni fetish, and then a sort of pseudo petroglyph. And can you talk about those a little bit and how you came about?
Yeah, all of the fetishes are of an animal of some sort that I saw that day. So they're very, very carefully chosen, because in my diary I would note down what I'd seen, and I'd look through it and say, okay, well, I saw a bobcat, or I saw a squirrel, or I saw whatever, and I would get a fetish that recorded that, really, or that acknowledged that. And then the petroglyphs really are petroglyphs of what happened that day, because of course I think that certainly things like newspaper rock and those famous petroglyphs, I mean, it's called newspaper rock, and you can assume that it is a record of hunts, and it's a record of events of that, the people as they passed that place. And so I was trying to make my own little petroglyph record of what happened to me that day.
And the fetishes, the Zuni fetishes, are made by specific people, correct?
Yes. They are.
How did you find those people?
Oh, I didn't find the people. I went to a specialist in Santa Fe and talked to them and just got what I needed and got them to tell me who'd made them all so that they could be acknowledged. Yeah.
I appreciate so much that you named them.
Well, I mean, they're fellow artists as far as I'm concerned. We've joined together in making these objects, really.
So the mittens.
Yes.
I want to see the mittens. I love the visual of these amazing structures just appearing out of the flat earth. Was it hard for you to find the right sort of perspective on them, or was it?
Well, funnily enough, in a way, it was a coincidence, because I looked at these two things and I thought, I guess those would work, but then you can't just paint the first thing you see. And so I then went round the valley to have a look at all the other major pieces, and I couldn't make them work. I couldn't make anywhere else work. It was strange. They all seemed sort of two-dimensional. It was weird. I could see how they were wonderful for John Ford in making his movies, but they just didn't make a painting. That's the only way I can explain it. They just looked two-dimensional. And so I scuttled down there again and looked at it and thought, yeah, that does work. That's perfect. And so I made that painting, and then having done that, I thought, well, I want to know what the Navajo name for these is, because the mittens is obviously the Anglo name because they look like a pair of mittens, but it seems such a corny name for such extraordinary, beautiful objects, and so I thought the Navajo name might make more sense, and so I made an appointment to go and see the Navajo park chief, and I asked him what because nobody seemed to know the answer to my question. So they said, oh, the chief will know. So I went to see the chief, and he said, well, I could tell you, but that information is worth money. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, well, he said, you know, we made $12 out of you to come into the park. You'll no doubt sell your picture for a lot of money. And what do we get out of it? And I said, oh, okay. And anyway, so I could see that I could see that was a point, you know. And so so anyway, he told me the name, which I can't actually pronounce, but anyway, he told me it. I wrote it down, and I went away, and then I thought about it as I was driving along, and I thought, he's got a very good point, really. And so I went back, and so I went back to see him, and I said, I've been thinking about what you said, and I think you're right. I said, you know, I may well sell that painting, and if I do, you're right, I'll have made money out of your asset, which is your landscape. And so how would it be if I gave you 10% of the sale price? And when I told him roughly how much it might be, he said, well, perhaps we could do a scholarship for one of the children to go. And I said, that'd be perfect. I love that. So that's what we did. So yeah, but it was that point which I hadn't thought of before, that is their only asset. And you know, it's very difficult to make a living in that country. And so, you know, the fact that he made $12 for my admission fee.
Well, there is also the notion of sharing the stories and sharing the oral history, which is mostly the native history is an oral history tradition.
Yeah.
And to share them out of context or share them out of culture, it's challenging. It's challenging to know how to do that. So
yeah, I must admit
what a lovely lesson you had, and what a lovely and gracious way you responded to that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I must admit, at first I was very depressed because I thought, wow, you know, perhaps I've been exploiting people all this time. You know, I've never felt that before, but when it was pointed out to me, I realised that you know, there should be some payback.
Right. Now there's a scholarship.
Yeah.
A lovely thing.
That's right.
That's a lovely thing.
Yeah.
Well, Tony, as always, I so love hearing these stories and our conversation. It really enhances people's, or certainly my experience of the paintings and this place. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your stories. Thank you for your really fine artwork. We're really grateful.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say so. It's always a pleasure to see you, Kristin.